Here we are, another 2022 bike model, and one of the models I've been most excited about. I'm happy to have already seen some glowing reviews on this bike, most notable the Pinkbike review as part of the Downcountry bike reviews they did. Regarding their Downcountry title for this bike, I think that's sort of off the mark. I think this bike is truly what a trail bike is supposed to be, with a good balance of abilities between climbing, descending, fast, slow, or techie. This is a trail bike. This is the new Rocky Mountain Element, specifically the Element A50. For those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. What I do here is take a look at bikes, take a close look at the details and specifications, then talk about geometry and suitability. I will even, when appropriate, compare to similar bikes offered from other brands. If you're into bikes or into shopping for a bike and want someone to take you on a guided tour through a bunch of bikes, consider subscribing to this channel. I try to be as honest as possible, but I will warn you that this is a bike channel from a bike shop, so we are going to be biased, though I try and be as honest as possible. Stick with us, let's have a look at the Element A50. This is a brand new Element, redesigned and reimagined from the ground up. The Element's roots came from being a pretty hardcore cross-country race bike, one with quite a few fans in the XC world, so this change won't be cheered by all riders. But for people looking for a light, super zippy trail bike with big capability, there will be cheers. This is now a true trail bike. Suspension has been increased to 120mm rear with a 130mm fork, and geometry has been modernized, so much so that the geometry chart could easily belong to a bike with 20 or 30mm more travel. This A50 is the top spec alloy priced model at $4,619 Canadian, with two lower spec models below it. The Element A10 is the lowest priced model at $29.99 Canadian, and there are four carbon models above this, starting at $5,300 and going all the way to $11,500 Canadian. Components on this bike include Shimano XT rear derailleur, mated to SLX shifters, brakes, and cassette. The drivetrain is a 1x12 with 10 to 51 tooth cassette. Cranks are Raceface A-Fect cinch cranks running on an FSA BB92 Pressfit BB. The chainring is a 32 tooth machined alloy Raceface narrow wide ring, on this bike at least, because they are spec'd actually with steel narrow wide rings, or that's what their website says. The detail that impresses me on this bike is the 170mm long cranks on all sizes but the extra small, which gets a 165. I have personally been switching bikes to 170mm cranks from the stock 175s for the last 5 years after reading some articles about efficiency and trying to minimize pedal strikes, so I appreciate when brands are catching on to this sort of idea. My only criticism is I think 165 should be on size small as well. Tire clearance is good for an XC-inspired bike with what looks like enough room to comfortably run 2.5-inch wide tires. There's good clearance at both the seat stays and chain stays. The stock tires are Maxxis Recon 29 by 2.4 tires with XO casing, so definitely tires aimed at being light and fast rolling. I suspect, considering how many people are thinking of getting an Element to ride at its absolute limit, a common upgrade will at least be to more aggressive treaded tires with more sturdy casings like the new XO Plus or even a double down on the rear. And many will also likely upgrade from the stock wheels to something with a bit wider rims so they can get the most out of those 2.5-inch wide tires. The stock rims are WTB I-27s, which mean they have 27mm wide internal rims on SLX hubs, so nothing to complain about. Upgrades on this bike will really be about changes people want to make, not changes they need to make. The Element frame uses a horse link suspension design. That means there is a main pivot on the seat tube and a second link on the chainstay, just ahead and below the rear axle. Rocky Mountain's design isn't the firmest pedaling design out there, as they are trying to keep suspension compliant for added traction on loose or chunky climbs. Having ridden previous versions of the Element, Pipeline, and Instinct, the one thing I'm preparing to do when I get my personal Element is to put a volume reducer in the rear shock to increase the progressivity, as I find their designs in general ride a bit too deep in the travel when sag is set at about 30%. That said, this is a personal preference thing, not a knock on the design. In Rocky's defense, one of the reasons they position their rear shock under the top tube rather than in line with the seat tube is to make reaching the compression lever on the rear shock easy for the rider. And speaking of the rear shock, it is a Fox DPS with 3-position lever for on-the-fly compression adjustment between open, trail, and firm. At the rear shock mount, you'll find another detail unique to Rocky Mountain, their Ride 4 system, which gives geometry and progressivity adjustment to the rider. Ride 4 isn't an on-the-fly adjustment, but is pretty easy with a couple Allen keys and a couple minutes. Even though Rocky has offered this sort of adjustment for many years, riders out there are just beginning to get curious enough to try the different settings, where I found in the past many riders were a bit shy to mess with this sort of stuff. This new element frame sees enough room for 2 water bottles on the down tube, some good chainstay protection to both protect the paint and reduce chain slap noise. There is a good chunk of rubber at the bottom of the down tube too. Cable routing is a little untidy at the down tube seat tube area, but executed in a smart way to make dropper cable access straightforward and stopping rear brake hose and rear derailleur housing from being exposed or being in an area where they can get pinched. I much prefer to see a bit of cabling in the bottom bracket area and have easy maintenance than everything hidden away and a huge headache when work needs to be done. So kudos to Rocky on that one. The seat post is the Rocky Mountain Toonie Drop, a simple but pretty reliable design. Its length is frame size dependent, with extra small and small getting 125mm of drop, medium getting 150mm, and the large and extra large getting 170mm drops. The frame has pretty short seat tubes, so many riders may be able to go a size or 2 up in the amount of drop. The fork is a Fox 34 Performance fork, so it's a good, reliable option without the sort of fussy stuff of the Grip 2 where you have high and low speed compression adjustment. This is just a low speed compression adjustment. 34mm stanchions should be more than stiff enough for most riders, even if they plan to ride quite aggressively. One thing to note is that Rocky has used an extra thick bottom headset cup, so for those people who want to increase the travel of the fork, it could be increased by about 10mm without affecting the bike's geometry in any meaningful way. This is for sure a bike that many are going to be looking to overfork. Getting to the cockpit, all sizes of this element are equipped with 50mm long Rocky Mountain branded stems with 31.8mm bar clamps. Handlebars are also Rocky Mountain and have 25mm of rise and measure 780mm wide. Grips are ODI Elite Pro lock-on, which is a nice little detail. The brakes, as mentioned before, are Shimano SLX. This is one of my personal favorite bike parts for offering amazing, reliable performance. These SLX brakes are the 2-piston version, rather than the 4. In Pinkbike's review of the very fancy element, this was one of the only criticisms they tried to make. In that case, it was a super fancy element with XTR brakes. I think you really have to be searching pretty hard to have criticism of any of the better Shimano 2-piston brakes. Easier to criticize are the resin brake pads and fairly basic rotors. If I were to buy this model of element and found myself unhappy with the brakes, I would switch to finned metallic brake pads and Ice Tech rotors, as that would mean more to me than switching to 4-piston brakes. That may be an uncommon opinion though. Geometry highlights. Because of the Ride 4 adjustments, I will say about, and quote roughly the middle of the adjustment range. Head angle, about 65.5 degrees. Seat angle, 76.5. Reach on the size large, about 480mm. And chainstay length, 435mm. Once again, the weight on this alloy 50 is 30.9 pounds. Comparables. What is interesting is the way many people, including bike media, seem to be viewing and reviewing the element, as if this was the first time a 120-130mm bike actually came out with big bike geometry. This isn't the case. What is the case, though, is that the element is creating a lot of buzz for this category. Excitement in this category is well deserved, and I'm glad to see it. 2 years ago, Norco and Marin came out with their Optic and Rift Zone, respectively, which are quite comparable in travel, geometry, and target audience. Having spent a lot of time on the Marin Rift Zone, treating it like a short travel freeride bike, I can fully endorse this concept of bike and vouch for its abilities and the way it's really fun. For 2022, Giant is joining the party with their new Trance 29, which looks like a great addition to the segment, except for the fact that there really aren't going to be many of them produced this year. On the fancy end of things, the Pivot Trail 429 basically established this whole category, and they're on the second version of the Trail 429 now, and while its geometry isn't quite as radical, it's still every bit as capable with just that extra little bit of sophistication in its suspension and execution. While not as noteworthy on this 30.9 pound alloy version, the carbon elements are even lighter than the Pivot Trail 429, the C50 weighing only 28.5 pounds. So that is one of the big standout features I think on the Element, is its lightweight. Secondly, I think it's that ride floor adjustment. So for people as they're getting more comfortable and more interested in geometry adjustment, I really do think that that means something. On the other end of the spectrum, the Marin Rift Zone is the burliest of the bunch in this short travel aggressive bike. It's heavier, but rides in a way that really gives you that confidence that you're on a tough, burly bike. So who is this bike for? I personally think this is the right bike for way more people than will actually consider it. It, along with the other bikes I mentioned, are a great choice for most mountain bikers who ride trails that are loops. If you shuttle or take chairlifts, this probably isn't the bike for you. But if you're doing loops, something that doesn't get too free ride-ish, doesn't get too steep or too chunky, this is going to be a great option. I wouldn't hesitate to use this on many of Squamish or North Shore's Black Diamond trails, and would basically just draw the line where I started seeing too many 6-foot or bigger drops. The geometry adds so much ability to the bike, while the short travel and lightweight make for a bike that is less tiring in the slower speed technical stuff. And that is our quick review of the Rocky Mountain Element A50. If you found this video useful, please press the like button and consider subscribing. If you're in southern Alberta, I hope we'll see you in the shop one day. Drop by and say hello. All of us in the shop love talking about bikes and helping people to understand their options and what will suit them best. Happy trails.